وإذا قيل لهم أنفقوا مما رزقكم الله قال الذين كفروا
Spanning the globe from east to west, a united land for all Muslims under one glorious caliphate. ISIS seeks to reclaim a so-called golden age of Islam. That, they say, is God's will. ISIS claims that this divine prophecy will never be realized through democracy. Its leaders point to the failure of the Arab Spring as proof of how democracy itself has failed the Arab world. The wave of popular revolts calling for democratic change swept across the Middle East in 2011, from Tunisia to Libya and Egypt, Syria and even Yemen. But in many cases, the uprisings only weakened the state institutions. In the ensuing chaos in Syria, Iraq and Libya, ISIS was able to hijack the people's calls for freedom and turn popular opinions against the protests. For many, the Arab Spring has now become synonymous with ISIS and the unleashing of a sectarian war that threatens states and societies alike. ISIS claims that the failure of the Arab Spring to bring about lasting change highlights the futility of democratic politics and the necessity of their own violent path, as decreed in these founding texts. The management of savagery, the jurisprudence of jihad, the essentials of making ready for jihad. ISIS offers these texts as evidence of God's will and justification for their bloody jihad. But of these three sacred texts, not one was actually written for ISIS. They were created long before the group existed. One of them has even been totally disowned by its author. And though these jihadist manuals do advocate an offensive holy war, ISIS uses a narrow and reductive reading of them. It has plagiarized many of the theologies and developed none of them independently. This is because ISIS suffers from a lack of intellectual support. Of the thousands of recognized Muslim scholars currently active, not a single one has offered the group intellectual or theological validation. Without any form of scholarly counsel, ISIS suffers from a poverty of ideas. Taking hold, like the roots of a tree, that is how ISIS want to be seen. But the reality is different. Good governance provides stability, prosperity, and freedom. But ISIS fails on all counts, providing instead the bare minimum standard of goods and services to an increasingly aggrieved population. ISIS is at odds with the values of the communities it rules over, so its support from within is much weaker than the propagandists would have us believe.
Life here involves reduced salaries, not enough to live on. There are taxes, fines, and religious education with no opportunity to question anything. The group has exploited the chaos in our country and has appointed themselves as providers of security. Many here have returned and pledged allegiance to ISIS in return for jobs and bread. Meanwhile, ISIS spend their money creating propaganda, trying to paint a picture of a glorious and functioning state.
Their outer strength is also overstated. On the battlefield, ISIS has made enemies both near and far and suffers huge military setbacks daily. Between 2014 and 2016, it is estimated that the group lost 40% of its territory. Having united the world against their deadly vision, they are fighting battles on every front. No state can survive such pressure. ISIS lures many thousands of young fighters, but though they may appear brave and battle-hardened, in reality many of them have existential anxieties and suffer from a lack of identity.
I cannot swallow the idea that my son has hurt these poor people. I cannot stomach that. If I could talk to him now, I would plead with him, please do not hurt any more people. Why do these young boys turn out the way they turn out? From normal teenagers to killing machines. They are suffering an identity crisis. They are not becoming assimilated into the communities like we, their parents, want them to. They have become indoctrinated, recruited by people preaching hatred.
ISIS has become expert in luring these troubled souls, creating human robots and spilling their blood in the name of its holy war. Since its rise, an estimated 30,000 young men have traveled to join and fight for the Islamic State. Around 7 to 10% of its foreign recruits have been women and girls.
I was drawn to the idea of living under the caliphate, joining our brothers to support them by being wives and bearing children. But the reality is so different. So many of us have been forced into sexual slavery. We are peddled around like barrels of oil. I've made the biggest mistake of my life.
ISIS has enslaved many women. In 2014, the group captured over 5,000 women from the Yazidi community, many of whom were forced into sexual slavery, an official trade managed by a Department of War Spoils and complete with contracts notarized by its own courts. For the young men and women living under the Islamic State, there is no glorious caliphate. There is only dust. The glorious caliphate is an idea rooted in 7th century Arabia. It overlooks 14 centuries of Muslim history and society. It is a myth, masquerading as law and imposing the past on the present. But this narrative, this brand of jihadism, of which ISIS is only the most recent iteration, can be fought with a powerful weapon: ideas. A revolution in ideas will be the first line of defense against the jihadist ideology, and will be the final nail in its coffin. That revolution starts now.